Hey guys, it's Mitch Maley and welcome to another edition of Punk Rock Politics. As Election Day gets closer, it now seems almost certain that Congress will not enact a comprehensive financial stimulus package despite the damage that's been wrought on the economy by the global pandemic or the pain it's caused millions of Americans. Why? Because politically, it makes more sense to point fingers than to craft sensible policy. President Donald Trump refused to work with Democrats this summer when they were pushing for a second giant stimulus and actually instructed his Treasury Secretary earlier this month to stop negotiations, then telling Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell to instead focus on getting his Supreme Court nominee approved before the election. Trailing badly in the polls, however, Trump now says he wants to make a deal. The problem is, neither Democrats nor Republicans are interested in doing one. Democrats were willing to hand the president an easy win when the election was further away, but have no incentive to move now that it's less than a month before the election is over and their candidate is enjoying an enormous lead in the polls. None beyond the suffering that's being experienced by millions of Americans, of course, but neither party has been willing to put them out front unless doing so coincidentally represented a political victory. Meanwhile, congressional Republicans, worried that Democrats are about to take over the White House, are retreating to the default debt and deficits are always bad line they'll undoubtedly use again if Biden wins, despite having spent like drunken sailors while they had control of the White House, just as they did in 8 years under George W. Bush and 8 more under Ronald Reagan. You see, like the first round of stimulus, this was never about frontline workers, vulnerable families, or unemployed Americans for either party. For politicians, lobbyists, and a donor class, every crisis represents an opportunity, a way to instill enough fear or anger of what the other side wants to do in their followers that the focus shifts on preventing someone else's win rather than getting what voters want or need. So, as the election draws closer, expect little more than the same sort of political posturing and finger pointing we're seeing now, as each party tries to gin up as much fear and anger among their potential voters to tip the scale in their favor. Meanwhile, 51 million Americans remain unemployed, many without access to health care during a global pandemic. Over 17 million Americans are behind on rent or mortgage payments with no prospect of being able to get back on track. Despite all that suffering, we recently learned that billionaire donors benefited from a private White House briefing in February that indicated the virus's disastrous potential even as the White House was publicly downplaying it. The New York Times reported on Thursday that White House Chief Economic Advisor Larry Kudlow told the board members of the conservative Hoover Institution that the virus was, quote, contained in the U.S. to date, but now we just don't know. That was just hours after telling CNBC that containment efforts were, quote, pretty close to airtight. A hedge fund consultant in attendance wrote a memo which was passed on to other outside investors, and within 24 hours, at least 7 investors at 4 money managers had been tipped off, and soon the secret was out. Within a day, traders acted on the information, sending the market into a tumble, with the S&P 500 falling 11% that week alone. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and economists at the Council of Economic Advisors were also named as having spoken much more seriously about the novel virus privately than they did in public. Billionaire wealth has risen $10.2 trillion amid the COVID crisis, up nearly $1 trillion since before the pandemic. Elites in the donor class would love for everyday Americans to believe that those who really run the country are in that position because they've earned it, and that the infinitely expanding wealth gap in our country is caused by nothing more than the strategic genius of those who thrive in the markets. But as this and other similar scandals demonstrate, the markets are often rigged casinos in which some people know how the dice are going to fall before they're even thrown, while the less powerful players are just pawns in a scheme to redistribute wealth upward. And you know what? Both parties represent this class above the average everyday Americans whose votes keep them in office. I'm Mitch Maley, and that's it for this edition of Punk Rock Politics. But don't forget, you can always get more at punkrockpolitics.com. Thanks, guys.